Welcome back to the Crypto Clown World podcast. I am your host with the honks, Jason Bruce. It is the 7th of April, 2024, Sunday, and we're actually coming up on an eclipse tomorrow and the weekly close here for Bitcoin in just a couple hours. So we've got some things to discuss outside of that as well. I have my co-host Christopher Lundy with me. Chris, you with me, sir?
I am.
All right. Thanks for joining me as always. How you doing?
All right, man. I been very focused on precious metals of late and finding some really interesting angles in regards to new routes of transit for maritime trade infrastructure that I think will be very interesting in today's podcast. I'm looking forward to sharing. So, but personally, I've been focusing very much on my health and, maintaining consistent growing of food. Got some really excellent tomatoes going, some very nice kale and cabbage as well, and several other things. So I'm looking forward to how that develops. And it's a clear day. A rare clear day in my locale. Completely blue skies, perfect sun. I haven't seen a sky like that in a very long time, so that was nice to experience.
Right on, man. So you're looking at metals. I had been hearing they've been making some moves here. I wonder if they're going to run counter to Bitcoin in a way.
Or parallel. I mean, it's hard to say at this point because if you got ETF movement out of precious metals ETFs and into Bitcoin ETFs, that's bullish for the price of silver and gold because all of the money that is in the COMEX is essentially an unsecured loan to the COMEX. Whereas if you own Bitcoin, it's yours. So I think that we are reaching the point now that the World Gold Council anticipated that we were going to reach in the 2008 financial crisis. And we are above, officially, the highs that were reached in gold's price when it was pushing $2,000, maybe slightly higher, before it rejected.
Let's take a look at that.
To the downside.
Let's take a look at that.
And silver was pushing $50 at the time. And it tanked spectacularly. It went down to the low $10 range at one point, as I recall. Almost all the way back down to the point of control from 2008 after the crisis was first announced, and the price of silver tanked down to something between $5 to $8. I don't remember exactly. But of late, all I'm seeing are green candles up and to the right, which is not unusual. Whenever silver moves, it tends to move rather quickly and then stop. You could see 10, 20, 30, 100% moves, and then it all sells off and the cycle's over. So, but based upon my look at the charts, I mean, I think that we've reached an inflection point in terms of how precious metals are priced, at least in U.S. dollar terms. What are your thoughts on that?
It's quite possible, sir. If we're looking at the chart here, there's like an ascending triangle, right? I don't know if you can see my screen share there. So
Certainly can.
Excuse me. Keep in mind, this is on a very large time frame, so this breakout, from the top of the triangle, which was right around just under 2100, around 2080, up to the point that we're at right now, around 23. So it's a pretty sizable move for gold. That's what, 15% that's occurred over the last looks like about 6 weeks. So even in terms of how gold moves, that's pretty aggressive. But there's a few things to take note of here, just real basic stuff. Obviously, you've got price well above the 21 MA middle Bollinger Band. That's actually bending above this triangle now that you've broken out of. So you may see some retest of that at some point, but it's not going to be like, a fast type of a thing. It's going to come up to meet that price action here. So you're probably going to flag out in this area a little bit. You may see a little bit of sideways action, and you're going to have these moving averages following that as well, your 200 daily and your 200 weekly. So, you're well above both of those as well, indicating a bullish trend. You're showing a breakout on the RSI, retest there, showing a bullish trend. So this is all just very bullish, and your measured move would take you up to around 3,650, and that's going to play out into, you know, early spring of 26. So would that line up with a potential, you know, uh, market cycle scenario that would kind of line up with how Bitcoin would move? Yeah, possibly. We could see something like that, but this may be a little more extended out. So I'm not sure we'll see Bitcoin maintaining its highs into 26, but we'll see if it moves sideways, into that range. I would expect it to peak out, sometime in 25.
But anytime you're seeing gold all-time high prices, and I've spoken to this on previous podcasts, look around. What do you see? Political systems failing. Tom Luongo has spoken to this many times. Gold always responds to political systems failing. And all we see are green candles since these wars started. So
True.
So that there's a dual meaning behind this. That means that war is good for gold's price. So
Yeah, certainly. I mean, you've got, nations that
present.
are warring or thinking about warring, that are hoarding gold. And I mean, essentially the United States and China have been engaged in a trade war and a proxy war for decades now. And obviously there's the proxies of, other countries that are involved with our lobby, and there's there's a lot of interests involved. So you're going to see, these types of assets become very valuable. So this chart is reflecting that. And I mean, I'm sure if we zoom out here a little bit more on the gold, say, let's even go to like a 3 month chart. This is just getting started on the 3 month here. So, when you look at how this is working on your RSI here, you've got an even larger breakout that's occurring there, and that's kind of like a cup and handle type of a thing. And I've looked at this previously as well, and there was another cup type of a formation. And keep in mind, this is the 4x. This is not the full history, but I believe this last cup is around the time that the gold ETF was put into effect, and that just skyrocketed from there. So if we see like fractalization on that, you'll see gold hit 5 digits. So 10,000 is not unrealistic by the end of the decade. Just keep in mind, it's not going to move as quickly as Bitcoin or other assets, but it is arguably the hardest hedge against just, inflation and other potential risk, because it does give you the physical asset in hand in case there's a breakdown in infrastructure. And that is the only weakness that I see with Bitcoin, is that you do have the potential where, you may have an infrastructure down for several years, and obviously you'll still be able to access your wallet once the infrastructure comes back up, but you do need the infrastructure in place in order to use Bitcoin, and that is the reality of the situation.
It is. And if I may move on to the main talking points of today's podcast. So it's almost like every week is a new historical event at this point. So
There's acceleration for sure. It's I believe that we'll only see more of that.
yeah, there's no such thing as a slow news day in this crypto cycle, it seems. But so let's kick it off with an interesting event that happened in Greece recently. So American tanks have been going into Eastern Europe over the course of the last month. And the Russian government formally notified the government of Serbia that the West was plotting a color revolution to oust them from power, because Serbia is essentially I wouldn't call it a client state of Russia, but I think it would be more accurate to call it a rump state, or essentially part of its sphere of influence. I would say Serbia is very much like the old world Europe, attempting to make its sovereignty respected. There were some issues in Serbia where there were different electoral standards that were enacted between Bosnian Serbs and Serbs in Belgrade proper. And that, to my understanding, was directed by the NGO, shall we say, cabal, as it were. And how does this relate to Greece? Well, that there's a port of entry that's been used, two specific ports of entry. One that it is tends to have more volume associated with it, and that's the port of Alexandropolis. And a train with American tanks was turned around at this port. So the train was loaded with American tanks, mainly Bradley tanks, and Bradley fighting vehicles, and the Abrams tanks primarily. It was heading to Bulgaria. That was its destination. Why on earth are American tanks showing up in Bulgaria? Where are they going? It's very interesting. Could be a transport corridor into Ukraine. Could be something else. The final destination isn't known based upon this article, but the people at the port that were working there were shouting slogans such as "Alexandropolis is a port of the people and not a stronghold of imperialists." And on the carriages, they wrote in red paint, "Murderers go home." This is a shocking event for many reasons, because if we think about Greece, Greece is the birthplace of democracy. Athens, right? And the West purports to uphold democracy. But the initial inventor of democracy is branding us as murderers and telling us that we're persona non grata. So this is just another signpost on America's decline under the current regime. Moving on. There are some very bizarre things that are happening in the Middle East right now as it relates to press censorship, even of the mainstream press, though it's not bizarre within the context of what we're dealing with as it relates to the current conflicts in the Levant, specifically Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, etc., now Iran. So the Likud party announced that the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, intends to close the Qatari Al Jazeera channel in Israel and will meet with legislators to approve the measure, in which they later approved in the Knesset. They approved a bill to ban Al Jazeera. So Israel is going to be battening down the hatches around media coverage of what is happening within the space of the war in order to control the narrative. This is the degree in which they are intending to move. So that is probably not unexpected, considering the next story. So Mossad's public X account had stated that Hamas had attacked World Central Kitchen aid workers, killing them. Interestingly, Sky News published on their Twitter account that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stated that the 7 aid workers were killed by a, quote, unintended strike, close quote, by Israeli forces, whereas Mossad previously said that Hamas did it. And later, the British government summoned the Israeli ambassador, and Rishi Sunak contacted Benjamin Netanyahu as a result of that strike, reportedly, or it could simply be a backpedaling move, that he intends to declare Israel in violation of international law. It has not happened publicly to my knowledge, but it has been publicly announced that the UK is going to be suspending arms sales to Israel after it became public knowledge that the United Kingdom's own lawyers were advising the government to stop the arms sales or they would be complicit in genocide. So they finally decided to take their advice. Whether or not it's too late for them, I guess we'll have to find out in the years to come. Moving on to Asia and around the world, we have seen strong, powerful earthquakes in unconnected places, seemingly, in many different areas of the world, including Taiwan, Ecuador, off the east coast of Japan, and several other places. And interestingly, the depth of every single one of these earthquakes was exactly 10 kilometers, which I found to be very interesting. So, in terms of what happened in Taiwan, there was an earthquake. It had an amplitude of approximately 7.7. It got up to almost the level of the earthquake in Turkey last year at 7.8 on the Richter scale. Now, the problem in Turkey is that whenever those earthquakes came through, the building standards in Turkey were not followed through upon for building standards in seismically active zones, because in Taiwan, the buildings had lost their support structures in places and they tilted quite strongly as a result of this earthquake, but they did not end up collapsing or losing integrity of their structures, and they didn't bury people under the rubble as a result. In Turkey, most of the residents died because local builders built many buildings without complying with the standards for seismically active regions. So it's because of, interestingly, Taiwan's building standards being followed for seismically active regions that they were spared a far worse catastrophe. But if you look at the buildings within Taiwan, it's going to take years to fix this problem. This is a very significant earthquake, and so much so that semiconductor production was under threat, which has created some very significant problems, which leads me to believe that there's a hidden hand at work here that we may not know about, especially as it relates to the geopolitical contest between between China and the United States for technological dominance vis-a-vis the manufacturing capabilities they have in Taiwan. But more onshoring is something that I expect to happen. Significant rare earth discoveries have happened in Wyoming in the United States as well as Montana. So, interestingly, that's just in time because China controls most of the world's rare earths, and that is something that, from a geopolitical perspective, if you have an adversarial country that's controlling supplies of things that you need, you probably need to find a different supply source. And many Southeast Asian countries have made attempts to find alternative supply sources, but we shall see how that plays out, because this type of infrastructure damage in Taiwan is not going to go away overnight. We will see ripple effects. I will be paying attention. Also, we have major news out of Germany, ladies and gentlemen. The German government, through Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Twitter account, publicly announced that there was no COVID-19 pandemic. The federal government were forced to admit that the so-called conspiracy theorists were right about everything during the pandemic. So I expect to see prosecutions, because if one Western government has admitted to this, then chances are more will follow, and more people are going to be arrested. They're going to be prosecuted. Many will be tried for treason. This is just the beginning of that process. So pay attention to that space, the legal space, as it relates to the COVID criminals. Moving on to back to Britain, back to the UK. So Sky News reported that the British civil servants overseeing arms exports to Israel, they requested to cease work immediately over fears they would be complicit in war crimes. So the blockade that Ansar Allah is currently enforcing against Israel has decreased port movements into Eilat by 80%. And now they're looking to blockade the rest of Israel's ports of Ashdod and Haifa as well. So as we speak, this is going to, and already is doing, significant damage to Israel's economy. The government, interestingly, put out a notice for people to get cash out of ATMs, but subsequently removed that because they didn't want all the money to run out of the ATMs, which I found interesting that they're asking people to get cash at the exact same time that they're putting out all the CBDC propaganda, right? That's very bizarre, right? So that tells you something, that the government realizes that if cash isn't available, in a crisis, the people aren't going to go to the ATMs. They're going to go to the politicians' houses. Only they're already doing it in Israel. There was a massive protest of over 100,000 people in Tel Aviv recently, demanding the resignation of Netanyahu. And the Israeli connection was actually stormed by the protesters, demanding an immediate exchange deal with Hamas and the end of the war. So temperature in Israeli society is starting to reach paranoid proportions because as we speak, this is another huge piece of news. The Iranian consulate in Damascus, Syria, was bombed by Israel and destroyed, and at least seven casualties of high-ranking Iranian generals and members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps were killed in the attack. And as we speak, Iran is threatening direct retaliation against Israel, and has reached out to the United States to tell them and give them an out, actually. They stated that they will not directly strike Israel if the following conditions are met. There's a permanent ceasefire and withdrawal in Gaza, and no ground invasion of Rafah. So they're giving one last chance because Iran holds both the United States and Israel responsible for the bombing, which means that retaliation against American military assets is likely to happen sooner rather than later if that offer is not accepted. And as we're speaking about the balance of power and the Overton window shifting, I wanted to bring to the attention a new Arctic route that's being developed for navigation on the open seas by Russia. So actually, I'm going to forward this to you so you can have a look at it for later consumption, Jason, because this is a really, really fascinating chart to look at.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so here's the deal. Like, we've got this blockade in the Red Sea that we've been talking about. But if you're talking about moving shipments from the Far East to Western Europe, you've got two routes right now. You've got Rotterdam to Shanghai via the Suez Canal, which is about 10,500 kilometers. And you got Rotterdam to Shanghai via via Africa, which is 13.8 thousand kilometers. However, Rotterdam to Shanghai via the Russian Arctic Sea or Arctic Ocean is 8,443 kilometers. What does this mean? So, well, there's a few things. The Russian Arctic route goes through Russian waters and will only be open to nations friendly to Russia, which means we won't be able to use it, and Europe won't be able to use it. Now, also, Russia's building nuclear-powered super icebreakers to keep the Arctic route open year-round. And this is significant because if the United States cannot use this route, what does that mean? Well, the only icebreaker fleet that exists alternatively to that is an embarrassment, especially as it relates to the United States and Canada, because if you're going to try to go north around Canada, you're going to have to pack enough food and fuel for a frozen-in winter because there are not submarines going out there breaking up the ice for consistent flow of goods and services. Do I expect that to change? I think it's possible. I think new trade routes, trade routes, however you want to phrase it, are going to become a reality in the years to come as a matter of necessity to avoid conflict zones during the wars that are currently operating and expanding. And that is all for my talking points, Jason. If you have any comments, or feel free to ask.
Wild stuff as always, man. I usually have very little, if any, awareness of a lot of the stuff that you bring to my attention, so I do thank you and kind of rely on you for those updates now weekly. It's pretty wild stuff that's going on over there. So, with all that going on, right, with trade routes shutting down and other things, we might see some pressure on oil, especially over the summer, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely, for sure. And that's probably why these trade routes need to be open, because as I stated in previous podcasts, Russia stopped all exporting of their oil for the next 6 months, I believe starting in February. So that expires in August, which means that they are trying to establish this trade route first before they start to open export, so they can control exactly where that's going to ensure that the West does not gain access to their oil infrastructure.
There you go. So you got that dovetailing
without
in
coming
there.
to the negotiating table. So Russia's play is to embargo Europe on energy to bring them to the negotiating table.
Yeah, and you're going into the summer as it is, so that's always the deal, right? So you're always going to get some upward pressure on oil going into the summer. It's almost never going to come down, just based on a supply and demand. But when you look at this, like, again, kind of similar to gold, but a little different pattern. You've come to the apex of a large consolidative triangle. Your price action is above the key moving averages, above the 200 weekly, 200 daily, and the middle Bollinger Band. This is here on the weekly time frame for WTI, West Texas Intermediate Crude. So this is just starting to break out now. You got price action just coming up to the local point of control, and you've got, a pretty bullish type of a flag here that's formed over the course of, the last 4.5 years now we're working on, since the pretty large dip that we had at the beginning of 2020. So this pattern obviously is very mature, and you're looking on a larger time frame, but with the way this is potentially breaking out, you could see oil possibly even come close to doubling in price as soon as this summer. So just be aware of that. And obviously, if that does happen, that's going to put the strain on economies, even the United States. People are not going to want to pay $6 or $7 a gallon for gasoline. So that's the potential that we may be seeing there. And, we're going to have to see something facilitate that, right? So what's going to be the linchpin, or what's going to make that kind of really pop off?
If I may, Jason, briefly, on the west coast of the United States, approximately 4 years ago, a citizen journalist went to local gas stations in Seattle and Los Angeles metropolitan areas where technicians were reprogramming gas pumps to accept prices above $10 per gallon. Why would they do that, I wonder? Something to think about, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the propaganda documentaries, put out by the large media corporations saying that stuff would happen, in the coming decade, and the chart's kind of setting up for it, unfortunately. So, potential weekly breakout on oil, and watch your gas prices, folks. That's probably all I can say there. Let's go ahead and dovetail into crypto then. I'm going to swing my short-term chart back over here. I was looking at that on another screen while we were kind of bouncing around there. And I did take a trade at the top of the show. I was long initially from this 69.2 area, looking for, this breakout level to hold, and potentially like an inverse head and shoulders. That did not hold. I did get stopped out. I did re-enter here right around this 69,000 area, so I am in profit now on that scalp. And, if you've got a double bottom here, which is really what I was looking at on this formation, if you get that to W out or double bottom out, then you're looking, 69.9, 69.950 on that scalp. And if you're to pull your fib, going to project that's pretty close to your golden pocket. And it actually comes right up to the 706 at 69,950. So that's the play I'm looking for right now. Again, stop loss at break even at 69,000. So we'll see if that one plays out. Obviously, if the price action can't get above the 21 MA on this small 6-minute time frame, you'll see further downside for BTC. If we zoom out a little bit more, back to our hourly here, this is partly what I was looking at too, because you're starting to see some hidden bullish divergences come in. You got a couple drives, you got one there, and then you got one that actually just kind of reinforced itself here. That might be a little harder to see, but if you zoom in on it, you'll see this is corresponding to, you know, much higher swing in price action, but a lower swing on the RSI. So those are things to keep an eye on when you're taking these types of trades. And you do have some support at the lower Bollinger Band as well. If that breaks, and you know, you're looking at potentially a bearish divergence there on the hourly, but now that's being held up by the hidden bullish. So the idea is that you'll stay in that range. If you don't, you'll volume gap down at this point of control, 67.7 there. And below that, you'd be looking at the lower part of the range, you know, 66.5, 65.5. And that's going to be a pretty important area. 65.5 has to hold. You start seeing any daily closures below 65.5, you're looking at a lot more potential downside. At least a retest of like 62 to 60. I don't actually think that we're going to see that right now. However, I do think that we're kind of building some bullish structure here, where potentially, you know, this might even be something like that going on with a little bit of an inverse head and shoulders. It's not the prettiest, but you may be getting a retest on that right now. So something to keep an eye on with that. If that were the case, you'd be looking at making a new high for BTC around 73.3. Or new local high at least. Did we hit a little bit higher than that, or is that gonna like, yeah, that's gonna like come up to the double top of the range, so you would see some resistance there. So we'll see if that plays out for BTC right now. You're a little bit cooked on the 4-hour stochastics, so that's something to keep in mind, but you've got the smaller time frames on your side right now. 7 minutes starting to move, so that trade's looking pretty good for me now. I did put that in with a 33x leverage, so not a huge position, but if that hits my target, I will make a fair amount of money in a short amount of time. More than most people make at their hourly wage. So with that in mind, I'm going to swing out a little bit here on BTC, and we're going to take a little bit more of a look at the macro right now. It's giving me really itchy vibes, I have to say. Even though we're rallying short term, this is giving me itchy vibes because of these stochastics. You got this weekly pointing down really sharply here. All right, with that sharp point down on the stochastics, you know, at the very least, you're going to test these levels around the 80 level in the overbought region. If you can't hold that and, you know, stay in these types of areas, you're likely to move into some sort of a bearish, further downside type of a consolidation, you know, or even a cascading type of a move. You know, if we come all the way back down here and reset on the weekly and we're still moving sideways and we hit the 21 on the Bollinger Band, the middle Bollinger Band, then we're golden. But this right now, you've got your RSI pointing down, stochastics pointing down. The only saving graces to me on the weekly right now are that we're closing above key support. We're well above the 21 MA. We're well above the 200 daily and the 200 weekly. And you've got long tails on these wicks, right? The problem on the weekly is that we did actually form a bearish divergence here. If we take a little closer look, you had this swing up here and then a much lower swing on the RSI, but when we look at where that corresponds to, it was this previous swing up and this closure here where we made this last high a couple weeks ago. So right now holding these levels seems to be key, but the idea is at some point you're going to have to come back to this 21. And we have not actually touched that since October of last year. Could we come back all the way down and retest the 200 daily or the 200 weekly? That's possible. Those areas right now are just below 45,000 and around 33,300 as we continue to see those moving averages curve up. Again, you know, if these curve up and we see some sideways consolidation and a bit of a dip down, even into the 50K area as we get a little more mature into the summer, that would be a healthy correction for the market, but that's a little ways off right now, and I'm not seeing that quite yet. We could still have another surge over the next month or two. There are some other macro things to keep in perspective. If we zoom out a little bit more, I'm not going to go that far in depth on the macro right now, but there are some other things there to look at. We'll take a look at where the weekly closes tonight. Technically, this should be a bullish close, at least short term, until we come up to some key resistance. Right now, if we take a look at the Bitcoin market cap dominance on the daily chart, there was this, what potentially was an ascending triangle, and we're hitting some resistance here now, right around the 54.67% area, which I did have highlighted, came right up to it, and we are seeing resistance there. So do we see further consolidation, come back down to the 21 MA and this point of control before potentially negotiating the top of this pattern, or do we have to see this come back down and retest these levels, or even just the 200 daily? The market cap dominance right now it's a little bit of an enigma because people are buying alts. There's no doubt about the fact the altcoin market has been hot, but you've got BlackRock buying a lot of Bitcoin too. And it's a different market than it used to be because BlackRock's Bitcoin is not flowing back into the altcoins. They are holding that Bitcoin. It's probably not going to move for quite a while unless they do something really dastardly with trying to manipulate the market. So if they're actually buying and holding that long term, say that, even just 5-10 years, you're not going to see the same type of liquidity flow back and forth between BTC and altcoins that you did before. You'll see some of that with the whales. Those whales will take their profits on the exchange over into those altcoins. But a lot of the buying of altcoins with the move of the altcoin market cap has actually come through either fiat or, a lot of it has been on Solana with their meme coins. Obviously some through Ethereum, even though Ethereum hasn't seen the move against Bitcoin yet. So if we move over to Ethereum, we take a look at the 1 hour, expand on this chop a little bit, and we do have a bit of a double bottom forming there. Potential breakout coming in, maybe even somewhat of an ascending triangle. Might be a little bit of a grasp or a reach, but you're in this type of a channel, right? And it's support and resistance that you're coming up to. And you have this volume gap on the VRVP, and 3,500 is your next area of any significant resistance. There's some more around 3,560. There's a point of control here on the hourly. I would say if Ethereum is able to get above that 36.33 area on the hourly, then you could expect more upside there and potentially challenge the highs, as you would kind of be looking at this as maybe a larger type of a triangle. And this probably makes a little more sense right here. So if we were to see something like that, you could see a significant move for Ethereum. Could potentially take you up to the 4,200 area. Possibly by the middle of the month. So maybe a breakout coming for Ethereum. We're still seeing some bullish divergence form on the 4-hour for the ETH BTC pair. So even though we've kind of come down and retested this previous zone, it looks like that's holding and potentially creating a double bottom where we've got some more even extended bullish divergence here. And then if we swing out, see if we might get some confirmation on the daily. No bullish divergence on the daily there yet. Well, maybe you could say you could try to stretch it all the way back there, but that's not your swing low. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that. But this actually looks pretty decent. You're seeing a bullish engulfing candle form for the ETH BTC pair on the daily, so that could create some momentum. Do have resistance at the 200 daily and 200 weekly. Once we flip those for Ethereum, probably on a weekly or monthly basis in terms of a closure, then we should see more upside for that pair. And, you know, maybe with what's shaping up here, maybe we do see the ETH ETF approval next month. I have been of the mind that we will see actually an initial rejection of that ETF request, as we did with Bitcoin, and as we kind of do with the sell in May and walk away type of stuff that we always hear about. So that could facilitate that type of a thing, right? Where if there was an ETH ETF denial in May, that we may see, you know, a bit of a sell-off in crypto, even a little bit of loss of confidence in Bitcoin as a result of that. But that remains to be seen. Okay, so a lot of that is prognostication, but some of it is based on what we're seeing on larger time frames. So if we take a look at the US dollar tether dominance, this did have a bit of a move up, and it's actually starting to flag out here, interestingly enough. So it's definitely taken a dip on the smaller time frames, but that 4-hour, the stochastics are trying to bend up. That could be a potential concern. And you do possibly have some hidden bullish divergence here. So if that holds up, you may start to see a little further sell-off. Got a little bit of a flag forming here. A little bit of a slightly descending parallel channel. So we'll keep an eye on that for US dollar tether. If we move over to total 3, this is just kind of meandering along sideways on the 4-hour. We were looking for this cup and handle breakout. That hasn't materialized yet. So are we potentially seeing something like this? If we break this resistance, can we see a move up? And these next targets here, you know, between about 823 billion and just under 900 billion for the total market cap, excluding Bitcoin and Ethereum. If we're going to see a run in altcoins, we're going to have to see that move. And it may just be that we're getting that here. Some type of a attempt at a breakout and possible rejection. We'll keep an eye on that. Keep in mind we'll have more liquidity coming in pretty quickly here, not just for BTC as CME opens here shortly, but we'll also see more volume come in as Monday opens up for the rest of the markets. So we'll swing over to small coins. We'll take a look at BNB. We're flagging out on the 1 hour here, low stochastics, hidden bullish divergence on the RSI. This actually looks pretty bullish for the third largest cryptocurrency by market cap. If it manages to stay in this flag, the measured move is actually fairly aggressive up to the area around $875, $876. So obviously the rest of the alts would fly if we were to see a move like that out of BNB, and if that corresponds with what we were looking at with Ethereum as well. Could see some other layer ones move along with that. If we take a look at Solana, this is actually gathering momentum on the 1 hour as well. A little bit of a rising wedge or a rising type of a channel there. But not necessarily bearish, just based on some of the divergence that we're potentially getting there. Solana moves in some odd ways sometimes. So if we like swing out to the 15 here, and you'll see the hidden bullish. Sometimes you really have to search for this stuff and drill down into some different time frames to get the confidence to find the divergences. And it's not always going to be on the 15 hourly and 4 hour, but 95% of the time it will be. So search those 3 time frames if you're looking for divergences for trades. So Solana looking pretty good here. If we swing out 4 hour, this is actually pretty consolidative. So kind of a big sideways pattern there for Solana. If it breaks out of it, it's going to have a pretty nice move. It's going to move. If that breaks, that'll be pretty big. Might test $300. Takes you right up to $300 actually. And like if you got more aggressive, down to this other wick. That next move is just south of 400. So could Solana double up here moving into April? That would be pretty wild. And obviously, you know, this could totally break down. You saw a fib retracement locally. I would say this volume node here sticking out around $130 could be a pretty solid buy point for Solana. And you might see the 200 daily moving average curve up to meet that if this price action just continues to move sideways. If we see a crab market over the next few weeks, we do have the halvening coming up as well. So, you know, keep that in mind. Sometimes we can just move sideways, as we won't necessarily be seeing, you know, a commitment from bulls or bears one way or another until that rolls around. And the last time it was pretty bearish, so We saw the significant dip with the panic around the pandemic, and we don't have that this time. We have a lot of upward pressure on the market, so there would have to be an event again to facilitate a large drop. Otherwise, we could just continue to see like sideways and up as we've continued to move here in this market. So I don't want to get too bearish until I have signs to get bearish, and I'm not quite seeing those signs yet, other than, like I said, some of the potential divergences that I'm seeing for BTC on the weekly. But we can possibly invalidate that with a new high over the next week. So we'll see how the market continues to move once again. Dogecoin is starting to consolidate a little bit sideways after it made that last high around 22.5 cents. We were looking at this area as resistance, came up and double topped, came back down, and now we're sort of finding some consolidation in this area around what's pretty close to a retest of the breakout of this support and resistance spider line. So if we zoom out a little bit further, for the doji, I don't like the way the 4-hour stochastics are curving down. So at the very least, you could see a retest of the 21 MA and the breakout of this level before you might see a little more of a move up. If this kind of, I don't know. I'm thinking maybe you could see a little bit of a head and shoulders possibly form, but you would have to come up more and then come back down and retest before that would happen. So I don't want to get too into the idea of that right now, but if you just look strictly from support and resistance, double top, breakdown of the double top, double bottom, breakout of the double bottom. Now you're seeing resistance at the area of the previous double top, and if you were to pull a fib on that, that resistance took you right up to the bottom of the golden pocket at 20.5 cents. So a pretty normal area to see some resistance in terms of the Dogecoin price action. It looks like it just kind of wants to meander sideways for right now, but it is going to follow BTC, obviously, when it comes down to it. So keep an eye on your meme coins, folks. Pepe did have a little move on the 4-hour over the last few candles. It's a little bit overbought right now. And, if you were to see this come back down, you could see a potential inverse head and shoulders form. If you were to see something like that. So maybe keep an eye out for that for Pepe. Get a drink here, folks. Bear with me. All right. So one other coin that we were looking at, and I put this out a couple weeks ago and failed to ape into this thing, Aerodrome Finance on Coinbase. This thing is absolutely skyrocketing. And it flagged out here. I was hoping that it would come back down a little further, but it couldn't break the volume of this node. And now we're back up here. So does it double top, or does it move all the way up to this next target at 250? Aerodrome Finance, folks. This is kind of like cake, but on Coinbase. So take a look at that in your own spare time. Do your own due diligence and research. As always, none of this is financial advice. Please don't construe it as such. Get yourself a financial advisor. Do your own research before jumping into any coin project, investment, or trade. And as always, I would like to ask you on the way out, please honk the like button for us, folks. Get subscribed to our channel if you're not, and hit the bell for notifications. We're going to be bringing you more podcasts in the future. I think that's about all I have to touch on right now. Let me see if anybody threw anything out in the Discord. Nothing too crazy there. So BTC coming back down a little bit. Looks like the 7-minute maybe potentially losing support. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. We'll watch the price action over the next 24 hours. Keep in mind trades Sunday into Monday, even Sunday into Tuesday can be highly volatile. Make sure you have a stop loss in place, folks. Always move it to break even if you can, if not in profit. And that way you can execute a worry-free trade. So, Chris, any parting shots or words for you, sir?
Sorry about the delay there. I'm not sure what happened there. Yeah, so one parting shot I wanted to make, and I think that this is going to be important for everyone to kind of pay attention to, is that Bitcoin's price action, as Jason was mentioning earlier, is going to undertake some different dynamics with TradFi coming into play. So I personally am less comfortable trading on any, just from my personal perspective. I want to own the actual crypto. Remember, not your keys, not your crypto.
Seriously.
So, if you don't have those assets in your physical possession, they aren't yours. Okay? People have not learned their lesson about the gold ETFs and the market manipulation. They're about to learn it again. However, I think that there's going to be Bitcoin precious metals trading pairs, Bitcoin oil trading pairs, and I expect that there will also be Bitcoin trading pairs with rare earths, or a series of different types of cryptocurrencies. I expect that to happen, but that's only going to become a reality in the event that gold re-enters the monetary system alongside it. And it's not going to enter it without a fight. And sit back and enjoy the show, because as the establishment wrestles with itself, we are probably going to see some benefits as a result of that. Because as we see these political systems fail, better systems will replace them, driven by sane people, sound mind, and good investment strategy and good morals. And that's really kind of what I wanted to put forward here. Is humility is important in trading, and accepting your losses, understanding how you went wrong or how you went right, and not overdoing it, and being cautious. And I think that caution and willingness, how you can develop your trading strategies and skills best. So be cautious, be patient, and to make slow, deliberate decisions.
Amen to that, brother. Make sure you have a system in place. Try to repeat it, and that should help you. So with all that said, we're coming up on an hour. I'm going to get honking on out of here. Thanks as always for joining me, Chris. Hope you have a fantastic weekend, and the same goes to anyone who's... Thank you, sir. Same goes to anyone who's made it this far. Please, again, if you haven't, make sure you're honking the like button on the way out. If you're not, get subscribed to our channel. Hit the bell for notifications. We're going to bring you these podcasts again weekly and more videos in the future as well. Again, I'm Jason Bruce. This has been Crypto Clown World. Have yourselves a fantastic weekend, folks. Take care. Much love, and God bless.